Welcome to our session all about working for a startup or scale up. I'm Leah from TYFU, and today we are very fortunate to be speaking to Steve Grace, a dynamic entrepreneur and the founder of several successful and innovative businesses like the Nudge Group, Nudge Productions, TNG Media, The Pillars, and a media company coming soon. Today, we are really focusing, though, on his role as the CEO and founder of the Nudge Group, a recruitment company dedicated to connecting startups and scale-ups with amazing talent. Operating across Australia, the UK, Europe, the US, and Asia, the Nudge Group supports businesses through every phase of growth, from their early stages through to IPO. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. You can maybe start by sharing a little bit about your background and what led you to create the Nudge Group.
Okay, good question. So my background has been recruitment. I had a very brief career in finance, which I discovered very quickly was not for me. And then went into a recruitment agency and ended up, they offered me a job and I ended up sort of working through recruitment. And I moved to Australia when I was about 25. And as soon as I got my residency, I started my first recruitment business, which was in that digital space because digital was new then. And we sold that. And then we did another one, which was in corporate and government. And we sold that. And I was like, what am I going to do now? Don't want to do another recruitment company. So I did another recruitment company. But I wanted to do something different. And I felt that startups are completely different in the way they should hire. They're completely different in the way people need to sort of, I guess, be sold to them and understand them. People have a very rose-tinted view of what it's like to work in startups, and it's not easy at all, and it's very different depending upon which phase you are. So I felt like we could build a company just completely dedicated to that, which was where the Nudge Group was born, which was 6 years ago now, which I find astounding.
It's growing very fast. So do you think having your first two startups kind of inspired it as well? Because you went through the startups and you grew those and...
I'm not sure inspired. It made it much easier because I understood exactly that I was my own customer. And if you actually look at all the businesses I run now, I am my own customer. Maybe I've discovered I'm not good at understanding my customers. I have to be that customer to understand it. I think when you actually, I think everyone always says startups are born from people having a problem.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think I had problems, but I was that customer that perhaps wasn't happy with what was there. So I created something. That's probably the best way of putting it.
Yeah, you saw a way you could help or add value, I suppose. And how did the Nudge Group grow? So it started off with an idea 6 years ago, and now it's such a successful business that's operating globally. How did that happen?
COVID, bizarrely.
Wow, successful COVID story. Love it.
Well, we started 6 months before COVID. And it was just with a lady called Dana, who's my COO, still works for me now. And Dana's worked for me in all of my companies as well. So I knew Dana a long time. And COVID came along. We're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Like everybody else. And essentially, it had this boom in startups because suddenly you had a lot of people at home. You had everyone suddenly wanting to buy online and e-commerce. You had everyone suddenly having to go into the cloud because you couldn't go into the office. So everyone had to be working remotely. And SaaS businesses just exploded. So there was a boom of startups, and it was a boom in funding as well. You know, everybody was getting funding. So it just enabled us to just scale super, super quickly because all of our clients were scaling super, super quickly. And we just sort of grew with them.
Amazing. So it's divine timing there. Excellent. And I wanted to ask, so what do you think people who are interested in working for a startup or scale up, because, you know, it does sound very exciting and it is, but what should they be aware of? What's the key differences between working for a startup or a larger organization? Like, obviously it's a bit riskier.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I disagree. I really do. I think when you have a downturn, there's a greater chance you get made redundant than there is for a startup failing. You know, a startup doesn't have to make a profit most of the time in its very early years. It's all about getting the funding. Once you've got the funding, that will last them, you know, their runway, as they call it, the X amount of time. Doesn't matter if the market goes up or down during that time. It will matter when you come around to your next round of funding. Whereas for profit companies, particularly larger ones, take downturns as an opportunity to cut costs. And so I've seen less people lose their jobs from startups than I ever saw through running corporate recruitment companies. So
super interesting. Okay, there you go. Yeah,
I think it's perceived that way, but I think Startups have a lot of phases, right? They have, and for anyone who doesn't understand the terminology, there's pre-seed, seed, series A, B, C, D, and so forth. And that really just is the levels of funding that they have. Um, Pre-seed obviously is the earliest, series D sort of one of the later ones. And I think the role that you're doing in a series D or a series B or a series A is very different to a pre-seed. So what you need to understand if you're going to work for a startup is, where am I suited? In a pre-seed, I need to love ambiguity. I need to be willing to do whatever the job needs. There isn't a job description. It's going to change constantly. It's going to be massive ups and downs. There's going to be no structure. I'm going to have to create everything myself. So if you like chaos, early stage startups are great.
Yeah.
But then they sort of hit this period around Series A where it starts to get a little bit more serious. And then you have to love putting in process and working out how things should be done. And that's a completely different personality. And then when you get to the later stages, Series C, every role becomes granular because it's scaling so fast. So then you just have to love doing one thing and doing one thing really well. So those are three totally different types of people.
Right. So there's the chaos stage, the structure stage, and then there's the
specialization.
Right, specialization. Yeah, that's very insightful. So pick which stage you like best.
Well, people don't know either. People all think they love the chaos, but most people don't. I think we have some ways of assessing, there's certain questions you can ask people to try and work out, because people really actually they've never thought about it. So they don't really understand what they love. And if you get them in the right stage, they'll perform really well. If you get them in the wrong stage, it's a disaster. And you see that, you see a lot of people come from larger startups, like an Elastic or a Canva that aren't technically a startup anymore, and go and join an early stage. And it's nothing like it. It's nothing like it at all. And they don't realize, and it can be a complete disaster.
Yeah. Do you see most candidates wanting to work for that early stage, or is it kind of just a mixed bag?
It's mixed.
Where are the most applicants?
I think anyone who's worked in a startup kind of knows where they should work, where they should fit. And anyone who doesn't, they want to work for the ones that they think have the coolest offices, the freest food, the nicest beanbags, all the cliches, right? Which you never get to use, by the way, because it's so frigging busy.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what people have that's their romantic view, right? They may have seen a TV show or whatever it is. It's nothing like any of those.
Yeah. And I think you hear about the success stories and they're always glorified. You don't hear about the hours and the blood, sweat and tears so much. Anything that recruiters are looking for, like tech skills, super high in demand at the moment? What's in demand for startups and scale-ups?
The market's probably the quietest it's been in a long time. Because funding has not frozen, but it's tightened up. And, like I said, the reason we boomed was because funding was flowing like crazy. Now there's a change. There was a grow at all cost mentality. So just chuck money at the program and grow and hire. Now they want to see a route to profitability. So a lot of companies are trying to work out how to do that, because that wasn't something they'd considered before. So what we're getting now is we've got a lot of candidates. So what clients are typically looking for is something quite specific. So it could be they're looking for domain experience, i.e. if you've worked in healthcare, they want healthcare. If you've worked in a B2C company where you're selling consumer products or that, something like that. Or it could be they want someone who's scaled a business into another country because they're doing that. But they're really drilling down. Okay. So I think the most common thing now is that the job descriptions coming through are incredibly detailed. Yeah. And we can probably find 10 to 15 people who match them exactly. Now, the problem that's presented for a lot of candidates, and I really feel for them, is you've got people who are amazing who don't necessarily know the markets like that. And they're not getting interviews and they think it's them. They think there's something wrong with them. And then they start applying for even wider, which means there's even less chance of them getting the job. And then they get even worse. And they end up in this downward spiral. And there's a lot of people in that space. And I probably have that conversation 5 times a week. And I think they need to understand it's nothing to do with them. It's the market. And, in Australia, the good news is when the market twitches and flips around, which it will do, I think, next year, there will suddenly be no candidates again, because it's such a small population. It goes from very candidate heavy to candidate poor sort of over 2-3 months. So
you do think it will shift? There's hope.
I do. I think when we get a interest rate cut of some form, you'll start to see that positivity come through, and you'll start to see money flow a bit more. And then what typically happens, it'll just go bananas. And that's a lot of companies are holding off hiring. They're holding on to their cash. Like we said, a lot of them don't make profits. They don't want to spend it, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as they feel they'll be able to get more funding, then they'll go nuts. So it's a fairly extreme world, startups. It's not like, you see corporates sort of do that. Startups are very much like that in every
much more roller coaster.
Yeah.
So it is a competitive market. What can job seekers do? Do you recommend doing like an unpaid internship or Is there anything that they can do while they're waiting for the market to turn or while they're waiting for the next opportunity?
Look, that's a good question. Stay where they are. Look, I think Australia, as a general rule, in any kind of sort of recruitment, is very much a who you know environment. Again, because it's a
Yeah,
small population.
small.
Startup world is even more cliquey in that respect. It's not big, and it's not massive in terms of the volumes of people. So my advice is go to as many events as possible. There are so many events all the time. You will see the same people all the time. You will develop relationships, and that, of course, makes everything easier. So, whilst you're waiting for that market, if you're not desperate to work and you've
Hmm.
got a job and you're financially okay, just focus on growing your network in the startup community or the scale up community. If you're not working, then yeah, I would be doing anything I can to get free internships, anything. And there aren't many free internships. Most people will still pay you
Yeah.
something, even if it's $20 an hour, because again,
Hmm.
you're much more likely to get a job because of someone you know than
Yeah.
because of the skill set, because the skill sets are often so grey and vague.
Yeah. No, I think networking is a big one as well, which we've just touched on. So, industry events, and if you can do some internships and just, I guess, hitting up everybody on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Any other strategies that you're aware of for networking, Steve, that have worked for you?
Um, Look, I think I would often say start using social media more, start conversations on LinkedIn and things like that. But everybody's doing that now.
Yeah, it's so noisy.
It's quite hard to differentiate yourself. I do think in-person events are really the key. They've taken off again the last probably 8 months more than ever.
Yeah.
There are more than ever, and the more of those you can go to. But don't just turn up, sit at the back, maybe speak to one person. Sit at the front, sit in the middle, ask some questions because everybody remembers the people that ask questions. And don't be afraid to ask. The one thing about the startup community is they're probably the most time poor people in the world, and they
Yeah.
are the most generous people with their time in the world. That's generally one, and it blew me away when I discovered this. So don't be afraid to ask. Everyone will talk to you. No one will get upset. No one will ever turn their nose up to you in that world,
Yeah.
which is why I love being in it and why I don't want to leave it. It's just different, and you just got to make sure you engage. And I'm not suggesting you're the liveliest person in the room, but you just need to talk to people. There's always someone standing on their own, always
Yeah.
someone.
I think sometimes it's also tempting to go with somebody you know. I think it's
Of course.
best to go to those events by yourself, and then you're forced to kind of network. And yeah, after a while, you will start to know people in the room anyway because it's familiar faces. But yeah, that's my tip.
Let me give you a really good example. I can give you a great example of
Yeah.
someone that really impressed me. I won't name them, but they're quite well known. In fact, they're very, very well known. They came to a event that I organized, and they didn't know a lot of people there, but everybody would have probably known them. But they wandered around and introduced themselves to everyone because they wanted to meet new people.
Yeah.
They didn't wait for people to come to them. They were there with about 5 people they knew. They didn't talk to them. They literally worked the room. And I thought, for someone who doesn't necessarily need to
Yeah.
do that, that's probably why everybody does know them. And that's
Loves them.
probably why they've done well, because you could see it was just their natural way.
Yeah. So they really stood out.
Yeah.
We also touched on this, but any kind of emerging trends in startups and scale ups that job seekers should be aware of? What industries do you think are going to be big next year?
I mean, I don't want to say AI because everyone says AI. I think you're going to see a lot of funding in the AI space. Now, AI could be any industry, so I think it's a bit of a limp answer. But I think healthcare is going to continue to boom. So anything in that health space, there's going to be a lot more funding flying into, and there is still into climate tech and environmental startups. Fintechs, I think, are not getting as funded as they used to be, which is probably a good thing because there's a lot of them. But there's
Hmm.
a lot in the more, I guess you would call physical world. So, Internet of Things, if you like. So, there's a lot of people creating startups in actual physical products as opposed to just software. And
Yeah.
there's a sort of real boom, and I guess you would call it industrial, if you like. So,
Hmm.
if you like things in so it could be automotives, it could be boats, it could be drones, it could be space, it could be like there's huge amounts of stuff happening
Yeah.
in that world. And
Tech
again,
startup.
yeah, and the funding flows a lot easier. Now they're very heavy on cash. They need a lot of funding
Yeah.
because they're making something as opposed to just coding something. But I
Yeah.
just think there's going to be a much more physical asset kind of boom happening. That's why I could be completely wrong, but that to me seems to be happening.
That sounds very exciting, and I hope you're right about that.
Me too.
Um, so I think we've got a couple of questions here from some members. So James has said, What do you think we can be asking startups during interviews to gauge how likely the business is to succeed or fail?
Okay, I think there's a couple of things. It's impossible to know, but the two main reasons startups fail, one is funding.
Yeah.
So you might want to query them and say, look, and you can ask them before, you can probably look it up, but I would look into the funding. I'd find out when was their last round of funding, what was the valuation, how many people are sitting on their cap table, and what is the quality of those people. So if it's 5 individuals, you got to say, okay, well, when they come to the next round, will those 5 individuals be able to do that? Maybe not. Is there a big VC in there? Is there a private equity firm in there?
Yeah.
Funding rounds are driven by one key person coming on and then everyone else follows. So if
Right.
they've got a key investor already invested in them, that is going to help them a lot, and particularly if it's a more well-known one. So I would look for that. But really, I would look at the founder. The founder drives everything in a business, including the culture. So you really want to try and assess that human being as much as they are assessing you. And if you don't really like them, if they don't impress you, you should not join that place.
Yeah.
Because, I don't mean they need to be like funny or engaging or charming. They need to impress. They actually need to impress you. You need to walk out of going, that man or that woman
Wow.
is impressive.
Yeah.
That's the place you should join. And that's the place we'll probably push through, because when they're that engaged in what they're doing, they will have the resilience to push through what will inevitably go wrong numerous times over the few years. So
Yeah.
I think it's founders with resilience. I would try and steer clear of companies with a lot of founders. That always tends to cause problems. They say that single founders are okay, 2 founders are the best, 3 founders is fine. Anything above that, it's a mess. So, I mean, dual founders, co-founders are helpful. They do also help push through things. So I think the key things are really the founders and the funding. And obviously, try not to go into industries that can be completely destroyed by legislation change. We've got elections coming up, all sorts of stuff like that. I'm just always wary of those.
Yeah. Well, I think there was a push for medicinal cannabis like last year, and that just seemed to flop as well. So
It's
yes,
fizzed.
you're right.
Yeah, it's fizzed. It'll come one day, but I think like nearly everything, when there's hype about it, it doesn't usually happen until about 2 years later.
Yeah, which is a good thing. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Oh, we do. Sorry. Sam, I have 20 years of experience in the corporate world as a middle manager, and I'm looking at transitioning over to the startup space. What corporate skills do you see as being most transferable to the startup space? Do you have any tips on how to prepare for the transition? Also, anything I should be aware of before venturing down this path?
Okay. I
Thanks.
used to
There's a lot there.
teach a class about this to help corporate people make the move over. Look, I think one of the first things you need to do is you need to go and understand the terminology, because it's completely different. Like if you use corporate terminology in a startup interview, you won't get it. You just won't get the job. And the only way you can do that is by immersing yourself. So again, this is the same old thing. Start going to events, start seeing how people talk, seeing the words they use, seeing how they sort of describe their world, so you can talk like that. But ultimately, if you're coming out of a corporate, early stage startups are not for you at all. Unless you've just not discovered your personality, or maybe you've got a side hustle and you're that way, the chances of that succeeding on both sides are quite slim. So I think you need to go into sort of a series A or B above, and you need to go into a startup that needs structure, but they don't necessarily know structure. So it won't be a founder that's come from corporate. It will be a founder that hasn't come from corporate and actually doesn't know what that world looks like, but they need some of that world to be able to scale. So scaling startups that are going to scale fast, and you need to take all the things that you had and you took for granted and help them create them so that they can get to that next phase. I think that's where you add the most value coming out of corporate. It's a hard transition. It's sort of a brutal baptism of fire, because all the things that you're used to are gone. And if you go into anything larger like a Series D, you're pretty much going into a corporate. And if you look at a Canva is a corporate, like Atlassian is a corporate, Safety Culture is a corporate. They don't see themselves that way, and they perhaps don't operate exactly like a NAB or a Westpac or a FAI.
They're established now.
They're established. So you can go into that. You'll find that transition very easy. That's scale up well. And that might be what you're doing. It's a slightly more dynamic version of what you are. But if you really truly want to go into startups, then you need to know that they've probably gone past what I would call startup phase, into scale up phase. And there's a lot of different definitions to that. But my definition of a scale up is a company that doesn't have a runway, i.e. isn't going to run out of money. So they've got funding. They've got maybe 60, 70 mil they raised, and they might be making a small profit. So they're not sort of running on a timeline. That's probably the best place you can go. And that would be an early stage scale up.
Yeah. That is such a fantastic answer. I love that because, you can work for a startup, but something that's more established and something that needs your corporate background and your value add. So good luck, Sam.
Good luck, Sam. And Sam, be prepared for everything to happen 5 times faster than it does now.
So, I think that's it for questions. Is that another comment? No. Thank you so much for your time today, Steve. This has been a really fun and insightful chat. And thank you for sharing all of your fantastic insights. And what an incredible journey you've had. Congratulations on all of your success.
Thank you. There's a long way to go yet.
We love watching all of your content getting pumped out. Thank you to everybody who is tuning in, and make sure you look at the Nudge Group if you are keen to get started in working for a startup or scale up. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, Leah.
Bye.